You don't have to be a lost man anymore, Joe. LYCAON. This is a 2026 low-budget werewolf movie. The man behind this, Scott Hand, who stars, directs, writes and produces. So the story of this one features this small kind of American community that seems to have been under attack by some type of animal. They put it down to wolf dogs, and the people who are victims and things seem to be in some type of therapy, and there's two psychiatrists that are working in this particular kind of town, and this one particular therapist is giving his patient some type of injection, some type of shot, which concerns the other guy, who's kind of like, well, you shouldn't be doing that as a psychiatrist. So we focus on a few different people who are kind of patients. All the meantime, the animal attacks continue, and we learn, you know, what's kind of going on and who's involved and what their motivations are. That's all I'll kind of say on the plot there. So let's discuss it. Now, again, we are talking a very, very low budget movie here, so we do have to have expectations in place. But let's talk about what we think works in this movie's favour. Possibly going to be looked at as somewhat of a throwaway B movie. There's a surprising amount of kind of stuff going on in regards to people's kind of motivations, what's kind of going on, who's involved and things like that. So the movie's actually reasonably dense, certainly in regards to having its characters and the relationships to them. The story itself isn't particularly sort of complicated, but the characters, and there's a reasonable amount who are involved here, and all their interpersonal relationships are very much at the forefront of this movie. So the movie does have a reasonable amount of kind of, I guess you would say, character development and kind of like, you know, a wide breadth of characters and you know, their relationships with one another. So it does seem more kind of going on, certainly within those elements to this movie, considering a lot of these sort of style movies, the characters are very kind of, you know, thinly written and don't really have much of a personality. Here, I would say the opposite is true. You actually have very much a kind of like a cast here, all of whom you spend a lot of time establishing and things like this. There's an attempt here to have the effects mostly practical. There's a little bit of kind of green screen and stuff, but for the most part, it's sort of practical, you know, and they wisely keep the werewolf hidden until really the end of the movie. And there may even be multiple werewolves. So that's kind of, that sort of, you know, would help in reasons why I'm going to kind of detail in just a little bit. But it gives you a little bit of like anticipation to see what the kind of the final werewolf will look like, I would suggest. And like I said, they've kind of lent into the kind of the practical effects. And there's certainly some sort of reverence here for, and kind of somewhat subtle references here and there for other kind of like horror movies and sort of things that you kind of would have heard before. Even going back to some other stuff, really. There's a lot of focus here on Greek mythology, believe it or not. So, you know, I would say I think there's some thought behind the script of this movie, certainly speaking. So the script itself doesn't seem quite as sort of throwaway. Okay. What doesn't work in this movie, it is a very, very low budget movie. And as much as I appreciate the fact that this movie does have a good amount of characterizations and some interesting kind of personal dynamics, we spend the vast majority of the movie with characters talking about their psychiatrist. Never in my life have I heard a movie with characters talking about, you know, therapy, anxiety, their psychiatrist, even movies that are specifically about this. You know, they talk about other things. But this movie is pretty much characters talking about some type of, you know, mental illness or therapy or something like that for the vast majority of the runtime. And as such, I've got to say, the dialogue becomes a little bit sort of repetitive and meaningless. I appreciate the fact here that we try to have a kind of quite a dense, you know, characterization and kind of set up for the kind of the what will transpire in the plot here. But I've got to say, I think it needed a little bit more going on in regards to other things, you know, a police investigation, things like that. You know, about other elements to kind of like what's happening with these kind of like animal attacks and stuff like that, rather than just people talking about, you know, their mental health. And even some of the kind of the way that they phrase some of this phrasing here, I found very odd. Like they're constantly referring to like, oh, he has spells of things, and I'm thinking they're using the word spells a lot here. And I thought, is there going to be some spell involved? That's in a magic spell rather than a kind of like a spell of nausea or something like that, you know. So yeah, it's kind of like the dialogue here, I've got to say, is a little on the clunky side, and repetitive, unfortunately. The acting it's generally speaking, I would say, a little bit on the cheesy side, particularly in the very final kind of like 10 minutes. It goes, everyone is like hamming it up to the max. But even until then, I would say the acting is mixed at best. When you have a movie which is so reliant on dialogue, it's really important to have, I think, the delivery of that dialogue be quite kind of dramatic and stuff. If this movie had, I think, had a little bit more going on in regards to practical things happening, you know, a police investigation, looking at the evidence and stuff like that, or more werewolf attacks, because I'll be honest with you, there isn't many. I think you could have had a little more variety in what's going on, a little less dense kind of like dialogue talking about psychiatry and things like that, which is the movie just is exhaustingly repetitive about. So, you know, it's ultimately gets kind of like, oh my god. And then there's some of the acting, not all, I think there are some better than others, but some of the acting here again doesn't quite nail home any type of genuine dramatic chops, let me say. And again, I repeat, so when you have a movie which is so reliant on dialogue, you need to have A, good dialogue, and B, good delivery of the dialogue. So the werewolf itself, I have to say some of the kind of the scenes were not particularly well staged. Let me just say, there's an attack at the beginning of the movie where the werewolf looks like you see like a claw come down, and then you'll sort of see from behind the victim, and the werewolf isn't there. It's like, was he meant to be invisible or something? And there's what I'm presuming is like a POV shot before like an attack, and you literally see like the camera above someone's head. They're literally standing like right behind you and going, like the guys completely clueless. So again, it's just like it's not particularly kind of well put together in a kind of like a dramatic sense in regards to the actual kind of horror elements here. It's clearly a very low budget movie, as I've said. When we do see our werewolf transformation and then the final werewolf, the transformation is like the most gentle transformation ever. Actually looks like, you know, completely peaceful. You know, this guy peacefully transforming into a werewolf, not an ounce of pain at all. And the werewolf, for some reason in that scene and just after he transforms, they've done it on a green screen or a blue screen. Why? It's just in a house. It's just like, why is this on green screen? And you have that kind of jagged edge around the kind of the characters and stuff, and it just looks awful. And the werewolf, as to say, you know, it looks more like your sort of 1940s Wolfman's aesthetic, which I appreciate the call back to, but it's not exactly like scary stuff. And yeah, so look, the movie really is, unfortunately, hampered by what clearly is quite a low budget. And I think as in many a times where you have one person which is kind of behind a movie and they have the kind of the say about everything, there's no one to kind of like push back on, sort of like to say maybe we should have had a few more scenes involving other characters, the police, something else visually kind of going on, rather than just people talking in rooms constantly about psychiatry. It's boring. So I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Leave me comments and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.